Okay, due to a slight mishap, we're going to have a part 1 and part 2 here. Um, I mentioned Senator John McCain. What separates him from the hundreds of other pilots? His dad was an admiral. He was a very high-ranking admiral in the U.S. Navy. So the North Vietnamese are very slick, very sophisticated, and they tried to use McCain as propaganda, like make commercials with him, trying to get him to say bad stuff about the United States. They would beat him and torture him a lot. He was extremely, grievously injured as he ejected out of his plane, which is going, hundreds and hundreds of miles an hour. So he broke a lot of his bones, and they would just kind of take advantage of that and hurt McCain. They also offered him to leave early. They offered him parole. And this is where you kind of see John McCain's heroism, or at least his integrity, come into play. But they offered him a way out. They're like, hey, you can just go home. And despite the fact that he's being tortured and he's in this really awful dungeon, he said, no, I'm not leaving. I refuse to leave, because our rules for United States prisoners of war say that the first prisoner gets to leave first, and so on and so forth down the line. You can't just cut these other guys out for political reasons or because it makes you look like you're generous. So one of the prisoners who was shot down before him would have to leave before McCain, and McCain said, yeah, that's the way it's got to be, or else I'm not leaving. So he just stayed in there until the end of the war. Last thing for Rolling Thunder, it ends in 1968. It was a political bombing mission from the beginning, and the end of it was political too. 1968 was an election year that was very, very tense, very tumultuous. There was a lot of riots in the streets and things like that. And Johnson called a halt because he wanted his hand-picked candidate to win, and that made his hand-picked candidate look better to the peace movement and certain people like that. So that's the end of Rolling Thunder. And again, if you watch the film, I highly recommend it. It's pretty good. Next, we're looking at page 9, U.S. versus the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army. All right. So communist forces target Americans and tried hard to wipe them out, but usually failed. Why? Well, we hear so many things about communists. They're very tricky. They're hard to find. How come they didn't win all the time? Well, they had inferior firepower. It wasn't as good as ours. Their communications weren't as good, like radios. The guy with the radio kills the most people in combat. Air power is virtually non-existent in South. So because of the firepower discrepancy, what the communist forces would try to do is something that they called hug the bell, right? Hug the bell. They try to come in and get close to the United States forces, so close that United States forces couldn't use their radios and call for artillery to come raining in on communist positions, or air power to come over and bomb them with conventional bombs or with napalm, which is sort of jellied gasoline stuff. It's very nasty. So their job was to get really close to the Americans, and then the Americans would try very hard to keep them away with their machine guns and rifles and their individual man-carried firepower. So that makes things a little dangerous if you're the VC too. You're trying to get close to the Americans. That's tough. Last thing here for page 9 is the trail, the Ho Chi Minh Trail. I wanted to talk about that, and my map kind of comes in handy here for the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So here's the north, here's the south. It's a very narrow-waisted country. Here's our 17th parallel, approximately, on my orange dotted line. But it's a very narrow-waisted country. It wouldn't be very hard to deny access to everything from the north and everyone from the north trying to come from here down to there. But that's not the problem. The problem is that they cheat and they go outside the boundaries and they go into Laos, a neutral country. They come through here and they come through Cambodia. Then they can come in, deliver their guys and their weapons. And there was this little nub of Cambodia that sticks out and kind of points towards the city of Saigon. And they could bring all these guys and their weapons really within very close proximity to Saigon. So what does that mean for the Americans and the South Vietnamese? It means these guys are always behind you. They're always lurking. There's no front lines, right? You can't say, you know, we're up to here and that's the enemy's on the other side of the line. They're always at your back and stalking on you. So they can always come in, and we're always kind of like on the defensive to a certain extent. Now, I would say if you were smart, and President Eisenhower from the 1950s talked about this too, he always said that Laos was the key to North Vietnam. I'm sorry, was the key to Vietnam, and he would have wanted to probably just send guys right over here. Just go right across. If they're going to go outside the boundaries, then you can go outside the boundaries. This country's not neutral if it's got foreign enemy troops rolling through it at their leisure. And this over here is Thailand. And they were anti-communist too. They would have definitely palled up with the Americans to keep the North Vietnamese out. So that probably is what should have happened, you know, in the early or mid 60s as the Americans start coming in. But that was never really an option. LBJ wouldn't let those guys do that. So the Ho Chi Minh Trail is a massive network of paths and trails. Sometimes people had trucks on it. They had people carry stuff on it, and just thousands of North Vietnamese communists coming down and either fighting in the south or supplying their little buddies in the south. Okay, so that's it for today. I don't have anything else for you on the map or with notes. I'll have some other films and things for you to watch that'll kind of flesh things out, and they should be pretty entertaining if you like this kind of thing. All right, thanks a lot. Bye-bye.